Hi, I'm Doris Epstein, and this is MENSCHlife TV. It's called the International Day of All Quds. They are rallies staged across major cities in Canada, the United States, and Europe. They are blatantly anti-Semitic and genocidally anti-Israel. We're going to hear from a group that's doing everything in their power to banish it. And later, Dr. Danielle Erez, clinical psychologist from Israel, that's going to talk to us about trauma, psychological trauma, and how some people get past it and go on to lead full lives. But first, please meet Howard English. Welcome from the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs.
Thank you, Doris. It's great to be back again, and thanks for the opportunity to talk about something that should concern not just Jews, but all residents of Ontario.
Well, this is terrifying. This Al-Quds rally against Israel, and really anti-Semitic, crudely anti-Semitic. Tell us about it, how it started.
The Al-Quds Day concept was started by Ayatollah Khomeini after the Iranian Revolution. And therefore, the people who participate in these rallies around the world are generally speaking unabashed supporters of the Iranian regime, which no one needs to be reminded about the fact that this regime is one that officially denies the Holocaust. And their adherence and loyalty to the Iranian regime is behind some of the reprehensible language that we videoed last year.
Okay, we're going to see that video. This is footage taken last year at Queen's Park, the government building area where it's planned again for this year.
Yes.
By CIJA, Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs.
Brothers and sisters, our next speaker for this afternoon is Sister Karen Brothers, and she's from the United Church of Canada. If we can ask Sister Karen Brothers to come up.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm very pleased to be here to say a few words. And the words are, we need you.
But what does this stooge government in the United States do, whether it was led by George Bush or this black man in the White House, Barack Obama? He would rather have Americans starve to death, but he cannot say no to this Zionist parasitical state. But inshallah, I see that day when we, the Muslims, will march on Palestine and liberate Palestine for all the people in the world, for the Jewish people, for the Christian people, and for the Muslim people. And under Islamic law, they will all be living as equal citizens.
And wherever you see injustice happening, understand there is a 1%, a 2%, a 100% involvement by the Zionist regime. The same Zionist regime that sucks the resources, the blood, and everything that belongs to the people of all across the world.
The first thing that it does is that it takes away the resources of all the healthy cells around it. It takes them away. Second thing that it does is it starts to multiply. And as it multiplies, it occupies over the other organs that are serving its function and going along and keeping the body alive. My brothers and sisters, the situation here is not any different. This world is a body, and this body has a cancer. And this cancer is spread, and you heard about what's happening in the United States. It's spread to different parts of it. The Palestinians are not the only ones suffering. But remember this, my brothers and sisters. Remember what is the end of that cancer cell. Either it dies and kills the body, or it's given treatment, and then it is killed to make sure that the body stays alive.
That is what makes them racists. That is what makes them inhuman. That is what makes them barbarians. And that is why we oppose Zionism. And we will not be intimidated by anybody, whether it is the government of Canada or anybody else.
We are blessed here in Toronto with the most wonderful, dedicated peace activists who represent many faiths and cultures.
From Iraq to Palestine! Occupation is a crime! From Iraq to Palestine!
We need you. We need you.
Karen Brothers was speaking from the United Church of Canada.
Yes, so the United Church of Canada disavowed her participation in the sense that the United Church said that Karen Brothers didn't represent the United Church. She was still introduced, however, as a representative of the United Church.
And we'll get to it if we have time, but just to mention that United Church of Canada just declared a boycott of the West Bank products.
Yes,
is that correct?
United Church of Canada endorsed a boycott.
In spite of 9 senators being opposed to it, in spite of many United Church members being opposed to it.
In fact, we conducted a survey before the General Council took place and before the General Council vote, which indicated quite clearly that a majority of members of the United Church did not support these kinds of resolutions. And the General Council ignored the evidence of opposition from members of the United Church, not only to the boycott resolution, but the United Church also passed a resolution expressing regret for having called upon the Palestinians to recognize the Jewish character of Israel. What a slap in the face to Jewish communities across Canada.
A kick in the stomach.
For
we'll
sure.
get back to Al-Quds Day in just a minute. Al-Quds Day, rallies, hate fests really, in major cities, staged across Canada, United States, and Europe. And we're hearing from Howard English from the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs about what they're doing to fight it. But first, I want to read you what Hank Rosenbaum, a survivor of the Holocaust, says. Never in my wildest dreams, 67 years after escaping from the Nazi regime, would I have imagined hearing people call for an extermination of the Jewish homeland. It's incredible. We've just seen footage about what they're saying. It's so crude, it's like something from the protocols, the Elders of Zion. And yet it's being staged on government grounds.
Well, I think that's the key. The language is reprehensible, it's vile, and it's ugly, and it uses many stereotypical anti-Semitic images. So, for instance, when the one person on the video says that it's Zionist, the Zionist regime sucks the blood of people all around the world, you can be in grade 2 and you can still understand that this is anti-Semitic imagery that goes back thousands of years. When Zafar Bangash refers to Israelis as inhuman and barbarians, what are we saying? We're saying the kinds of things that that anti-Semitic commentary has pointed to over the years. So there's no doubt about the anti-Semitic nature of this. And the racist remark about President Obama being that black man in the White House, this is the ugliest of language that took place on government property. So what we're talking about here is the dignity of the legislature. It's the dignity of the symbol of democracy of Ontario and the symbols of democracy for people all across Canada. And these kinds of statements should not be taking place on government property. The government has procedures, rules, and regulations that govern its use of its property.
Should it be allowed in public property altogether, in the public domain? What about our hate laws? This is clearly lies, stories, the ancient anti-Semitic libel. Why is it being allowed under hate laws?
Well, unfortunately, in Canada, it's very difficult to get a prosecution under the hate crime provision of the criminal code, and it's even more difficult to get a conviction. So the standard for determining whether a statement is a violation of the hate provisions of the criminal code is very, very high. But I don't think that's the issue. I don't think the issue is whether these kinds of despicable statements violate the hate crime provision of the criminal code. The issue is that this is hateful. It's hateful, it's hurtful, it's racist, and it's anti-Semitic. And it shouldn't be there on government property as something that people who are accidentally stepping onto that property hear, especially minors. And one of the rules governing the use of that space is whether an event or speeches or demonstrations or flags or any other manifestations would be harmful to minors. And clearly, this kind of language and these kinds of sentiments should not be something that minors or anybody else who's coming to the legislature should be hearing. It demeans the dignity of this place that stands for traditions and values. And the values of these people are totally out of sync with the values of most residents of Ontario.
Then how do they get away with holding this rally, for lack of a better word, on government grounds year after? This is not the first year, and this is not the second year. It's several years that they've been doing this. How do they get away with it?
Well, I don't think that until we chose to video what they said and publicize what they said, that their ugly language was widely publicized. Now that it's been widely publicized, and we made this available to all of the members of the legislature and to all political and journalistic influencers, now that the sergeant at arms, and the speaker can see what took place last year, we think it should be obvious that events like this should not be taking place at Queen's Park. There are rules governing what you can say and what you can express as a member of the public inside the legislature. The rules governing what you can say in demonstrations outside the legislature should be equally adhered to.
And yet, reading about it, it seems as though it's simply a bureaucratic process. The sergeant at arms is the one that makes the decision, and he works with the police to give permits. And one of the criteria is that there won't be trouble, there won't be violence. This is the man to make, and everybody else seems to be absolved of responsibility.
Well, you know, under constitutional law.
I mean, who is the sergeant at arms?
Well, the sergeant of arms is responsible for the security of the legislature. However, the speaker oversees the sergeant at arms. Under constitutional law, the parliament is the parliament of a province or of the country is the supreme decision-making body, over which even the courts have very little jurisdiction. So, you know, it's a principle of constitutional law, and it's the sergeant of arms at arms who makes the initial decision about whether an event will be taking place.
But that decision can be overridden. Is that what you're saying?
The speaker of the legislature has the final say.
Okay, let's hear about this and what your organization has been doing to be in touch with the speaker, with the ultimate decision making. Back in a minute. Howard, you've been fighting the permission to grant a permit to hold this rally on government grounds. What exactly have you done about it?
Well, we by the way, represent the organization which is the advocacy arm of Jewish federations, and the Jewish federations speak for, you know, thousands and thousands of donors to the federation system across Canada.
And speak for the entire Jewish community.
And we speak on behalf of the Jewish community of,
so what have you
Canada.
Done?
We have waged this battle vigorously. We have written to the sergeant at arms. We have spoken with MPPs. We are affiliated with Holocaust survivors and descendants, of which Hank Rosenbaum is the co-chair. So we work closely with Hank in being able to deliver the message that Hank delivered. We have spoken with the speaker. We have spoken with journalists. We have spread the word as much as we can possibly spread the word.
And the best thing you've done is take that video last year.
That's right. And we took it upon ourselves to film these people last year and to distribute this video. We are working very hard to make everyone aware.
Did you reach the Premier's office?
We did. We spoke with people in the Premier's office. I think the important thing that everybody to whom we've spoken has to understand is that we're not dealing here with legitimate criticism of Israel. We're not dealing here with people who say, well, you know, I'm opposed to Israel's policies on the settlements or whatever. We're dealing here with people who advocate the destruction of Israel, who equate the Zionist entity or the Zionist regime with Jews, who are using the Zionist regime, quote unquote, as a substitute for Jews. We're dealing with people who are vigorous adherents to the philosophy of the Iranian regime.
Do you think Iran is behind this?
Oh, without a doubt, Iran is behind it. Iran is behind Al-Quds Day. It originated with Iran. There's no reason to believe that Iran isn't behind it. And let's take a look at Iran. Iran is is the primary supporter of terrorism around the world. Iran is the parent of Hezbollah. Iran is the regime that denies the existence of the Holocaust. Iran is the regime that is trying to build nuclear weapons. I mean, let's take a look at the organization, at the country that the organizations supporting this are fanatically in favor of. And then you'll see that we're dealing with people and we're dealing with a demonstration that is not a legitimate expression of opinion about what Israel is doing. These are people who want to destroy Israel and are willing to use anti-Semitic imagery and racist remarks in order to do that.
And it's happening on government property in this country, in this province, and all across the country. It's in the United States too.
Well,
in the major cities.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether in every single province or every single state in the United States.
On their website, they announce.
No, I know that I know that these demonstrations are taking place. I can't say with certainty that they're taking place on the property of the state legislature or the provincial legislature, all over Canada. But in Ontario, it did take place. And there is a permit as of today, as of right now, for this to take place again on the property of the provincial legislature.
This is only one issue, an important one, vital one, and it's a template for effectiveness on other issues that come under the guise of criticism of Israel and of the Jewish people. What else is on your agenda? On CJA's agenda?
Well, right, I mean, we've been working on the United Church,
the boycott.
On the United Church issue. We worked before the General Council meeting, and now, in addition to expressing outrage against the decisions of the United Church, we're taking a look at concrete steps that can be taken. We're taking a look at a variety of measures. So that's one issue. We're very active on campus in helping students understand the distinction between the lies regarding Israel apartheid, so-called, and the truth. And we distribute thousands of pieces of literature across campuses to reveal the truth about the lies that are being spouted. We were very active at City Hall and in working with city councilors on the resolution to condemn the term Israel apartheid, and we continue to work with city councilors on criteria to determine what council will fund and what council won't fund. And we're also very active in the social service arena to protect the concept of ethno-specific social services, that is, social services which cater to specific ethnic and religious needs. So there's a huge range of issues in which we're involved. But I would say that in this case and in the case of the Israel apartheid lie, we're here to defend the dignity of Israel and the Jewish people, and to make sure that lies about Israel and the Jewish people are met with the resistance that they deserve.
Howard English, Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, I thank you very, very much.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Psychological trauma, why some people get past it, go on to lead full lives, and others are damaged for life. We're talking with Dr. Danielle Erez, clinical psychologist from the Trauma Center in Israel. The Trauma Center is an actual center, but Israel itself is a trauma center. From terrorists to car accidents, which is an enormous, still high, still terrible,
very high,
to the fear, the ongoing fear of attack that produces trauma. What, in your definition, constitutes psychological trauma?
Well, the definition that's really quoted often is that trauma really evokes a shattering of all assumptions that we have about ourselves, about people, and about the world in general.
Like you don't take for granted that the sun is going to come up.
Exactly.
That
Things
kind
that we
of
were
basic
fundamental assumptions, predictions, expectations of how the world functions, of how we interact with people, are shattered as a result of a traumatic event. And what we know is that trauma leads to several different symptoms and several different ways that a person is really rendered with an inability to function.
So what would be the symptoms of trauma?
Some of the basic symptoms of trauma are high level of hyperarousal.
What does that mean?
Someone is constantly on edge.
Startled, easily startled.
Easily startled, even when the actual trigger of the trauma is no longer present. But someone is very easily startled. There is a high tendency to avoid things that resemble or represent or remind the person of the traumatic events. And what we see also is very often there is a re-experiencing of the traumatic events. So it can either be through dreams, through nightmares, through flashbacks, where the person really feels as if they are re-experiencing the traumatic event. And all these symptoms, when one develops the actual diagnosis, it leads to an inability to function.
So people are destroyed. Their normal life is destroyed. And yet some people with the same experience move on, are not destroyed. I'm sure the scar, the memories, never go away. But that is your focus, resiliency.
Right. That is really what is very interesting to me and really in the field in general is this topic of resilience, where we see exactly how you put it. The trauma never really goes away, but how do people manage to
live with it? How do people, for instance, survivors of the Holocaust, some of them are broken for life. And some, many, the majority, oddly enough, go on to lead full lives. They married, they had children, they made businesses, like everybody else, but really not like everybody else.
Right. And this topic of resilience is something that in the field is talked about a lot right now. How do people
manage? This is new,
manage?
Isn't it? Before, psychology looked at the pathology, at the problems, at the dark side of human nature. They didn't look at how people kept themselves going and made themselves happy. So resiliency is a new perspective.
Well, it's definitely something that is focused a lot more now. and the questions of how really do people not just continue on with life, but how do they even grow beyond what they were before the trauma occurred? How do people take what happened to them and really go even further with their lives, with what they expected they would become? And the definition of resilience is really a very nice word in Hebrew. And it's one of those words in Hebrew that really makes sense. The word in Hebrew for resilience is chosen, which comes from the same root as inoculation. When you inoculate yourself, you protect yourself from a disease, from something that is dangerous to you. And that is really the area of focus of resilience. It's how to really build yourself in a way, either preventative, either before an event occurs or afterwards. How to prepare yourself, how to prepare your soul, how to prepare your psyche for a dangerous event, and also afterwards. If you didn't have the chance to prepare before, how do you pick up the pieces and build yourself in a way so that you're healthy and strong and you're able to adapt? Adaptability is really the key word. No one knows exactly what is the exact ingredients to build a resilient person. We know that it's made up of all sorts of different things, of genetics, of resources, of intelligence, of optimism, of social support, but really what it is the ability to adapt in the face of adversity.
When we come back, will you give us some examples of how we can prepare ourselves? Everybody's going to go through something bad in their life, some more, some less, barring disaster, no, including disaster, including natural disaster. Look at the earthquakes and the floods, and let alone war and terrorism. So what can parents do to prepare their children for the very bad times? And how do some people cope? How do they adapt after? You'll tell us about it when we come back. Getting over bad things, which nobody can escape. Why some people are able to do it, and how you are helping people to understand resiliency. Tell us more about it.
Well, at the Israel Center for the Treatment of Psychotrauma, our focus is really building resilience. How do we build resilience in ourselves, in our students, if we're teachers, if we work in the medical profession? How do we build resilience for our patients? Really, it's a focus on how do we build a resilient community. And under the directorship of Dr. Naomi Baum in Jerusalem, she put together a resilience model, which we see is really something that is very effective and works in all different types of communities, with children, with adults.
In all different kinds of cultures, not just Israeli culture?
We use the same model. We use it with Israelis, with Bedouins, internationally we took this model to Haiti.
You went to Haiti, and you'll tell us about that after, but okay. You took this model to Haiti after the earthquake to treat the survivors.
Right, to train the psychologists there to implement it with their patients, with their students as well. And what this model really promotes are some ingredients that help build resilience. The question was, how do we prepare? How do we prepare ourselves to make ourselves resilient? Question. And some of the things that we do know that work is the ability to create a strong sense of social support. If we feel connected to each other, if we feel that we have a strong support with each other, we're more resilient. We're not alone. We're able to feel like
somebody is
we can get
behind us, that somebody is with us.
Exactly. So social support is a huge ingredient, and that's something that is really unique to Israeli culture. When comparing Israeli culture to other cultures, something that we see that really stands out is a strong sense of social support. We know, we've all felt it, and especially when you go to Israel, you can't help but feel that it's one big family. that everyone is interested in everyone else. You can go on the bus and a stranger can tell you to button up your coat. It's a strong sense of social support. And that is one key ingredient in building resilience. So what we try to do is when working with people, we try to work with people in a group to create a really cohesive sense that wherever you find yourself, if you're in a staff of teachers, if you're in a medical unit, if you are a group of students, we try to work together with a group to help achieve that sense of social support. So that's one key ingredient.
And another element.
Another key element is the ability to build awareness, right? To be present with what it is you're experiencing. So often after a traumatic event, there's a disconnect. We disconnect to our experience, we disconnect from our physical bodies, and one way to really build resilience is to bring back that awareness, to bring back that mind-body connection. And one of the ways that we do that is by simply being mindful. For example, paying attention to your breath, stopping and taking a few minutes.
Instead of being in the present moment, being
in the
now.
present moment, being in the here and now, instead of go, 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 and moving on and avoiding. We mentioned before, one symptom of trauma is really avoiding what was. Instead of avoiding, stopping, being present. And an example of that is just paying attention to what's happening in ourselves, in our bodies. So oftentimes, if our focus is to build resilience in children, what this resilience model does first is to say, stop, before we move and we work with the children, let's work with ourselves. If we're working with teachers, let's first work with how to build resilience in myself as a teacher, in myself as a psychologist, in myself as a doctor, before I'm able to reach out and help someone else.
So there's a lot of work you do on yourself before you even approach anybody else.
Exactly.
I'm interested, and many people are, about how we can prepare children for the tough times in life. So what advice would you give parents?
Well, one thing that we advise parents is to be present. We mentioned that mindfulness, that mindfulness again. If a parent really holds in all the anxiety, then there's no doubt that a child is going to feel that, a child is going to really internalize that, even if it's not verbally communicated. So again, as a parent, being first aware of how is this stress, how is this trauma, how is this conflict impacting me? Before I can even look at my child, first to think, where am I? Where am I at this moment, and how am I coping? And then being open to asking your child that. And coping is really one of the other ingredients of resilience. Being aware of what helps me cope, what makes me feel better in a stressful time. And that's one thing that parents can really work very creatively with their children.
Give us some examples, Danielle.
For example, creating a book with your child about what helps me feel better. What's in my toolbox of things that I can do to help me feel better, whether it's a cuddle, whether it's a special treat that just soothes me and helps me feel better.
So simple.
So simple. But again, that first step, which is really the first step that we do in all types of cultures and groups and everything, is where am I? Building that awareness of first, before I can reach out to my child, I have to know, where am I? How am I coping with the stress that I'm involved with?
We're going to talk more about it in just a minute. We're speaking with Dr. Danielle Erez from the Trauma Center in Jerusalem. Danielle, is trauma, psychological trauma, different in Israel than in other parts of the world?
Well, that's a really great question. And what we do know is that there is a universal element to psychological trauma. You can be a part of any culture, you can be in any part of the world, and you will have similar symptoms after being exposed to a traumatic event. We also know that it is flavored differently depending on your culture, depending on the type of trauma. So what we do have in Israel, as you mentioned before, is a societal trauma. We have a society that in some areas, such as Sderot, where there is such a thing as ongoing psychological trauma, and in different places in Israel where there is trauma once every so often. We're talking about terrorism in Israel, in addition to car accidents and all the other universal types of trauma. So the impact of being exposed to a man-made traumatic event is very different than being exposed to a natural disaster. So there are different implications for that. And some traumatic events lead to more severe symptoms, such as rape, such as man-made, such as war and conflict. Being a combat soldier can lead to much more severe traumatic symptoms. But again, there is this universal element that the symptoms are generally the same, no matter where and no matter what.
Flashbacks, nightmares, avoidance, reliving.
Right.
That's universal.
That is universal. That is universal.
You've worked with children, with adults. In children, do we see different manifestations of trauma?
Well, we do see similar symptoms in children. What is different is that children don't always have the verbal outlet that adults do.
They can't describe, they can't reflect.
Describe it. They can't reflect as well. But there is an elasticity, a flexibility in children that promotes a different way of really working with them, that enables us to work with children in a much more creative way, which is, again, something that is another opening for resilience, for being able to build
Then we
resilience.
can learn from children about resilience. Is that what you're
Certainly.
saying?
We can definitely learn from children.
Who live very
and-
much in the moment, in the here and now. One of the coping mechanisms
Right.
that you use.
To being mindful, being in the here and now.
And children are
Exactly.
very much like that.
Yes, very much like that. And one of the things that we see in Israel is that when a traumatic event happens during the Second Intifada, when there were a lot of bombings, a lot of traumatic events, in the summer, the schools actually opened up for the children, because another element to promoting resilience, to really coping with trauma, is continuity, is being able to maintain the same schedule, the same structure that was, some element of continuity. And this was one of the greatest things to do for the kids, because in all the chaos and all the stress, they were able to go to a familiar structure, a familiar environment that they knew, and that was very helpful for them to open up the
So
schools.
stability, continuity, when disaster strikes
Exactly.
is very, very important.
And that's another thing that, often parents are not aware of. They think when a traumatic event happens, let's do things differently. Let's pull my child out, or let's give, let's change up the schedule a little bit. And
or
when
change
in fact,
schools,
change schools,
their life.
change environments, exactly. But actually promoting the same sense of continuity is something that is really beneficial to coping with trauma.
So when it happens to you, and it does to a certain extent, there's degrees of it, and degrees of the way people experience it, isn't it? Mm-hmm. The same situation, and some people will be deeply affected for a lifetime,
right.
and others will not. Is that correct to individual response?
That is.
We
that
shouldn't make
is.
assumptions that because people survive an earthquake or a bombing, that everybody comes out of it the same.
That is true. There are some people who can really not only survive, but thrive as a result of a traumatic event.
How do they thrive as a result? What do you mean?
Well, we're talking now about something called post-traumatic growth, which is, if you're familiar with the works of Viktor Frankl and Man's Search for Meaning, it's actually the idea that not despite a trauma, but because of a traumatic event, people rise to heights they never would have assumed they would have. For example, Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor, who went through the Holocaust, who suffered tremendously, lost his family, lost everything, but because of his perspective, because of his intent to really make meaning out of what he went through, he was able to build himself up, to contribute tremendously to the world after the Holocaust, and really not only survive, but really thrive as a result of the Holocaust. And we see that as well in traumatic events also across the world, and specifically in Israel, where people make tremendous meaning after tremendous loss, after such devastation. We can look at someone like the Mandels, right? As a result of
the Kobe Mandel,
after the loss of Kobe Mandel to
their
a
son
horrible,
in a terrorist
horrific terrorist
killing,
exactly.
their 13-year-old son that made this unbelievable, remarkable organization to help victims of terrorism.
Exactly.
That's a good example.
That's a wonderful example of post-traumatic growth, and something that seems to be very ironic, but when there are higher levels of post-trauma, there are actually higher levels of post-traumatic growth. That actually the trauma promotes the growth. Too much trauma is not a good thing, obviously, but
growth or no growth, we don't want it.
Growth or no growth, we'd rather not have it, but the trauma actually promotes high levels of this growth that we're talking about the ability to make meaning. And that is another key element of how to build resilience, is to be able to have that perspective.
To make sense out of it.
To make sense.
Dr. Danielle Erez, the Trauma Center in Jerusalem, I thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next time. Remember to be a mensch.